Battlefield 2042 first released on November the 19th, 2021. It came out in a shocking state, with huge bugs, maps that felt empty and coverless, and a general sense of unfinishedness. It's not like this came unexpectedly, however, as a month and a half earlier, in a beta lasting from the 6th to the 10th of October, testers had noticed that the game just didn't feel finished. This sense of unfinishedness was actually made worse with the full release of the game, as some bugs were fixed but with new ones added. Performance was bad on nearly every platform, and there was a noticeable lag on 128 player servers. This video will cover both what those original problems were and my experience of the game today, to see if the game has improved significantly enough to consider it a success. Of course, everyone has their own opinions and thoughts on games, so whether you agree or disagree with me, put them down in the comments below and we'll see who agrees with what. I'll start off with what my very first experience of the game was, and why I wrote it off so quickly. I downloaded Battlefield 2042 during release week. I didn't go straight in and buy the full game, but I downloaded the EA Play trial. My god, am I glad I did. From the very second I loaded the game up, the problems began. I launched the game, loaded into a game of conquest, and there was no enemy team. As in, every player on the map was friendly, the enemy's team's spawn area had just never materialised, so the game simply never started. I quit, and I felt a sinking feeling, as I realised that maybe this game was just as bad as everyone had said during the beta. See, I hadn't actually tested the beta myself, but a few of my friends had, and they all said that the game was a total disaster. Still, I thought, it's only a beta, maybe it's improved by launch. And it was as if I'd learned nothing from Fallout 76 beta, or from Marvel's Avengers, or even Anthem. I kept my faith and decided I'd hope for the best. Of course, as with every game on that short list, or any game in general, beta tests that release so close to actual release can't really be considered betas. They're more server strength tests, or for ironing out final bugs, or for fixing netcode. What was wrong with the Battlefield 2042 beta was programmed so deeply into the structure of the game that a simple month was never going to be enough. If it was just bugs that were the issue, it would have been a much easier road to success than the EA DICE were facing. What was wrong with Battlefield 2042 is that it just wasn't Battlefield. Let me explain. What was special about Battlefield, in my opinion anyway, is that it had a real sense of immersion that Call of Duty lacks. Destructible terrain, huge maps with plenty of cover, and different types of firefights in different areas, and even superior physics to create even more advantages on the battlefield. Well, Battlefield 2 just didn't have any of those things. It wasn't like the gunplay was bad, or the graphics were bad, or the maps were too small, or there weren't realistic physics. The maps were actually enormous, with dense vegetation and a new dynamic weather system. The issue was that the maps were just extremely poorly designed. When the maps you have are enormous, with 64 players on each team potentially shooting one another at the same time, you really need variation on those maps. On release, almost every map just felt like an enormous field, with massive runs across long distances to find anything, no cover at all, and no small towns to act as choke points. This is a serious problem in a game like Battlefield, as to have varied fights and create a truly immersive experience there has to be immersive options for cover. The other huge issue was that the buildings that did exist just weren't destructible. Those are the two of the most major features that really make Battlefield. It was just disappointing really, as the trailers showed a hugely impressive looking sandbox with plenty of opportunities to create unique moments, but in reality there were very few ways to actually create moments like that. There was also a massive amount of lag and poor netcode in all out war game modes, especially on the maps they used to utilise 128 players. I was crushed, as I realised that Battlefield 2042 just simply wasn't the game we'd all been waiting for, the Call of Duty challenger, and the game that would redeem Battlefield 5's shocking launch date. This was worse, much worse, and seemed almost totally beyond redemption. I decided to pick up Battlefield 2042 again about 2 weeks ago, after seeing an outburst of praise and hope for the future of the game on Reddit. I'd not long joined the Reddit, but I'd seen the game was on sale, so I thought I'd do some market research on whether it was worth it. After playing for over 15 hours over the last couple of weeks, I don't think Battlefield 2042 is exactly a success, but I don't consider it the total failure we'd seen it as at launch. Let me explain. My first thoughts on the game as I'd opened it was that it seemed faster, more responsive, and a hell of a lot less laggy. Menus loaded in properly, and I launched into a game of Conquest quickly and easily, with no problems. The more I played, the more I started to notice that the cover seemed a lot denser, there was a lot more variety in the maps, and the whole game just seemed to work, well, better. After seeing this for myself, I decided to have a little look at EA DICE's website to see what had and hadn't changed. That's where I learned just why the Reddit seems a hell of a lot more enthusiastic than I had almost a year ago. From what I saw, DICE had been hard at work overhauling the game, with maps being reworked, weapons being added, and new maps being added at a decently fast pace. That's when I decided that maybe this game did deserve a second chance, so I picked up my controller, booted up Battlefield 2042, and started to play. In Battlefield 2042, I was very skeptical. Having now experienced that content firsthand, I have to say that I'm glad. The inclusion of seasons has meant that new maps, weapons and bug fixes have come into the game at a more regular pace. Not only that, but I think that having structured seasons gives developers at DICE a target to work towards, which can only be a good thing in terms of the game having more of a complete vision. Speaking of those developers, they've clearly been working extremely hard to improve their game. I do applaud EA DICE for not dropping this bombshell of failure at our feet and letting it explode, because they have gone back and attempted to rewire and disarm it. I think that was the right thing to do. They could have cut and run, but they decided to give us a better experience instead, which I think, good on them. But, I'm not excusing the launch date of this game, as it was totally unacceptable, but this is certainly an improvement. If you do go to the bug fixes, on the Battlefield's website, you're greeted with a list so long that there's probably more bugs than there were active players before the first official season dropped. We're in Season 2 Massive Arms now, with Season 3 due to release in November. I wouldn't say the game's bug free now, but it's certainly a lot better than it was. Speaking of what else is significantly better, the idea to include Rush as a permanent game mode was a great move by DICE. It's still my absolute favourite mode of all time in Battlefield, and it feels right at home here in 2042. It was included in Season 2 recently, and speaking of seasons, Battlefield 2042 has enjoyed a healthy injection of players over the last few months. Part of this is almost certainly down to what else the new seasons have brought to the game. Starting with the new maps, the two newest seasons have brought us both Exposure and Stranded. These two maps are undoubtedly the strongest maps Battlefield 2042 has to offer, with Stranded being especially great. They both have mostly strong layouts, with tight chokeholds and larger areas for more open conflict should you choose. One of the reasons I love Stranded so much is because for modes such as Rush, it works brilliantly, as the capture points are all placed in clever locations that are equally as hard to defend as they are to attack. Games of Rush here feel like a true tug of war, with every game being a frantic scramble to gain the upper hand. This is also true with both Conquest and Breakthrough, and shows the developers really had been listening to player feedback. Despite the last two maps being shiny examples of what Battlefield 2042 could have been at launch, I think that actually what's equally as impressive is that DICE has taken a couple of the old, deeply compromised maps and turned them into new reworks. These maps have been given a lot of new cover, and significantly more of that is now breakable, and this is true on both the new maps too, leading to a significantly more Battlefield feeling experience. Both Kaleidoscope and Renewal have been given the rework treatment, and now they shine over the old maps they released with, such as Hourglass. Speaking of, I do still groan once I hear that I'm loaded into a game that's being played on some of the older maps. No matter how improved the gunplay feels, no matter how much better the entire experience now feels, these maps are bad, and they should never have been released in this state. They hang over the game and stain a now much more functional experience. The new reworked maps, however, bear almost no resemblance to how they were when they first released, with completely rearranged cover and layouts giving them a fluidity not seen before. And speaking of fluidity, Battlefield 2042 isn't quite on par with Call of Duty on how its gunplay feels, but it's still a damn sight better than it was upon release. When Battlefield 2042 released, All Out War was the worst way to play. It suffered from continually fluctuating frame rates, enormous maps with no cover, a specialist system that ignored all the learnings from previous Battlefield games, and too many bugs to count. Now, nearly a year on from release, a lot has changed, but a lot of what the problem was so deeply baked into Battlefield 2042's design choices that it hasn't yet been addressed. The first positive is that frame rates seem to have stopped fluctuating, at least on the Xbox Series S and X, which I played on for all of my 15 hours or so with the game. With the Xbox Series consoles, gameplay seems to run at a mostly solid, if not slightly lower than 60 frames. That makes such a huge difference to the gameplay, and when frame rates aren't consistent, they make it incredibly difficult to aim correctly. It also made the gunplay feel unsatisfying and less weighty. Now, the gunplay is so much better, and while firing a weapon still doesn't quite have the same crunch that it has in Call of Duty, it still feels pretty good to take down an enemy. One area that performance hasn't vastly improved, however, is on last-gen consoles. I also tested Battlefield 2042 on my Xbox Series consoles running the game as an Xbox One and an Xbox One X title. It's apparent from the very second you boot the game up that you've gone back a number of years in hardware power. The image quality looks incredibly subpar on both last-gen versions of the game, especially when compared to the new versions. It's understandable when you look at the hardware specifications of last-gen consoles compared to the new, but when you go back to the Battlefield 5, that game looks significantly better than this one does. Going back to the next-gen versions, the redesigns and new maps make a world of difference in All Out War. Conquest simply just works better, but I'd say its breakthrough, the new modes that Battlefield 2042 brought to the table, which is where the new map design makes the most difference. On the old maps, Breakthrough seems like a mode that was a good example in concept, but just didn't quite work as well in reality. Now, however, Breakthrough is a mode I found myself quite enjoying. It's fast, it's intense, and it's a very different experience from Conquest. All in all, I see the basics of Battlefield are to a much higher standard than they were. What isn't, and is still a problem, is the specialist system. Classes are a core part of the Battlefield formula, and part of what makes it so immersive. The removal of them here in 2042 is what alienated the classic Battlefield fans, as the gameplay system they knew and loved, the system that helped keep Battlefield from becoming so much more than just another Call of Duty, was gone. The opportunities for team play that classes brought to previous Battlefield games was what made them so consistently enjoyable. Here, even after a year, it still feels like the removal of classes from a specialist system was a wasted opportunity, and one that seemed to benefit only Hazard Zone. One positive announcement about this is that DICE are planning to return to the old class system in the next season in November. I'll have to test to see if that makes a difference, but for now, the traditional Battlefield feeling players are looking for in 2042 would have been aided hugely by the return of the class system. I didn't get much of a chance to play either of these modes, and it's not that I didn't try. One of the problems with a massive player drop-off is that people abandon the less popular game modes and then they go for the ones that they're familiar with. Both Hazard Zone and Portal have been victims of this. It's a huge shame, as both modes really seem to try to push the franchise into experimental new direction, and Portal was a genuine love project for the developers at DICE. Now, it's all but impossible to load into a game of Hazard Zone, and believe me, I tried. Out of the maybe 10 matches I tried to load into, I managed 2 before giving up. Hazard Zone is, unfortunately, dead, and that may be a combination of the player count, my platform of choice, or the other options out there, but nevertheless, it's an indication of how Hazard Zone is doing on all platforms. One of the issues is, there's just so many other options out there that are more accessible. Look at Escape from Tarkov for example, or Hunt Showdown. Both of those games offer a more refined experience than Hazard Zone does, for a much cheaper entry price, and they're also much more popular. Portal was having a similar issue, as there were very few servers with more than 20 players. I did spend a lot of time on one server that was playing Rush with all 128 players, and it went something like this. I think it's an enormous shame that Portal hasn't ended up being massively popular, as it was the jewel that made Battlefield 2042's crown shine pre-release. DICE desperately needs to add some new content to Portal, as that mode has suffered due to 2042's dwindling player count. Overall, I'd have to say that while I come away from my time spent with Battlefield 2042 feeling a lot more positive about the future of Battlefield, I'd also have to say that my feelings on it are still mixed. They're not quite as mixed as they were to begin with, but I still think that 2042 has a long way to go before it hits its peak. Saying that, I do wonder how much longer EA DICE will be able to hold their nerve as they feel their way towards an uncertain future. With their game, while holding a higher concurrent player count than it has since release, seems to be on the recovery, it's clearly still not high enough, as longer wait times for matches and the difficulty to find a game in Hazard Zone present significant ongoing problems for an already troubled release. What I must say is that I don't think this game is a failure any longer. I do think that it is a polarising game, but I don't think that it's a bad one, at least not anymore. Season 3 will be a game changer, as the removal of the current way that we use specialists will put Battlefield 2042 to the test and see if it can attract its old audience back. Will it succeed and become the game we all saw in the trailers? Or is it simply too far gone and so compromised on a design perspective that the players it desperately needs just won't return? Only time will tell, but the way that Battlefield 2042 has evolved over time has gained back many players that now genuinely appreciate it for what it's trying to be, and I'm one of those players. Let me know what you think in my comments. Take care, and have a good one.